106. Okay. So in question 106, it tells me the cosecant of theta is equal to negative root 2. Okay? Negative root 2. This is really, really tricky because it throws a lot of people off here. So I could think of it like that. So it would have a corresponding cosine, or sorry, sine of theta would be 1 over negative root 2. Okay? Well, we're not used to looking at that so much, but really what that is, if I was to rationalize this, that's negative root 2 over 2. Okay, it's negative root 2 over 2. So you can see, oh, this corresponds to a reference angle of 45 degrees. Okay, and that's really tricky because they wrote it in the unrationalized form, and that throws a lot of people off. Okay, so looking at this, I say, all right, so now that I know when does I have a negative sign, when I'm talking about things that reference to 45 degrees or pi over 4 stuff. So we got these 4 different quadrants, okay, oops, sorry. And y corresponds to sine, okay. So that means when I have a negative sign, I'm down here in quadrants, it puts me in quadrants 3 and 4, right? So that would basically be 5 pi over 4, right, which is right here. This one would work, 5 pi over 4, or it could be 7 pi over 4. 7 pi over 4, okay? Because they are in the, where the y's are negative or the sines are negative. So those are my two theta. So theta equals 5 pi over 4, or it could equal 7 pi over 4. All right? Okay, moving on. The last one, 108. Oh, sorry, there's a part B to that. Sorry, part B is cosecant of theta equals 2. So once again, putting this over 1, okay, so that would correspond to a sine of 1/2, okay. So where are my sines of 1/2s at? Well, sine is my y value. So that's a reference angle of pi over 6. Okay? That's a reference angle of pi over 6, or in other words, 30 degrees. Okay? So it's a positive one. It's a positive one. So that means I'm up here in quadrant 1 or quadrant 2, because we're talking about y values. So it's either pi over 6 here, right? Or it's over here, 5 pi over 6. So theta is equal to pi over 6 or 5 pi over 6. Those are my two options, because those give me positive y values. 108. Okay, 108. And 108 says the cotangent equals negative root 3. Okay, so I'm going to put that over 1. Put that over 1. Okay. And so let's look at it. Let's see if we can figure out some information here. So I really don't need to put it over 1, but when do I get a cotangent or tangent of root 3? Okay, and that comes, this is what's kind of tricky here, is you got to remember that, hopefully it's one of the ones you did memorize, but if I do root 3 over 2 divided by 1/2, what this equals is, right, and the 2's cross off, okay? And so cotangent being defined as, we could refer to it as the the x over the y, right, or the sine over the, cosine over the sine, and so you got to basically find, okay, what angle has an x value of root 3 over 2 and a sine of 1/2, and if you realize that, that is 30 degrees. Okay, that's 30 degrees. Okay. Well, the problem is it's negative. Okay, it's negative. So we got to deal with that. So let's see over here. So basically, okay, I'm dealing with angles that are referencing 30. So it can either be 30, 150, 210, or 330. Okay, or pi over 6, 5 pi over 6, 7 pi over 6, 11 pi over 6. So the cosine is negative, so that means one of them is negative, either the x is negative or the y is negative, and then it switches. So in quadrant 1, everything's positive, so that doesn't work. In quadrant 2, x's are negative and y's are positive, so that one can work. In quadrant 3, x's are negative, y's are negative, that will give us positive, that doesn't work. So I've got to be in quadrants 2 or 4. I got to be in quadrants 2 or 4. So that means I'm basically looking at right here, which is 5 pi over 6, and over here, which is 11 pi over 6. Okay? Those are my two options there. Okay? The second part tells me the secant of theta equals root 2. Secant of theta equals root 2. All right, so I got to find a reference angle. So secant, okay, if I want to think of this, corresponds to cosine. So once again, I got this situation where it's going to be a 45, right? It's just in the unrationalized form. Okay, it's in the unrationalized form, so I may not see that right away, but this is the same as root 2 over 2. Okay, so the secants are positive. Secants are involving the cosine, and cosine corresponds to the x. So we're talking and coming back here, drawing another little coordinate plane. I'm over here. I got to use this part of the x-axis. So that's going to be the 45 here and the 45 here, right? So that one's pi over 4, and this one is 7 pi over 4, and those are my two thetas. So those would be my answers right there.